What if the most important sentence Jesus ever spoke has been mistranslated for 2,000 years? Not ignored, not lost, softened, turned into a simple proverb about honesty, when it was actually something far more precise. A key, pointing to something sitting right now, in the center of your skull, no bigger than a grain of rice. You've probably heard the phrase, the light of the body is the eye. Maybe in church, maybe scrolling late at night, half searching for something you couldn't quite name. Most people hear it and move on. I didn't. I couldn't. Because once you understand what Jesus was actually pointing to, you cannot read the Gospels the same way again. This is about the pineal gland. This is about Christ consciousness. And this is about a teaching so quietly buried inside Scripture that most churches never taught it. Not because it was forbidden, but because almost nobody stopped long enough to ask what it truly meant. I've spent years going back to this one verse, comparing translations, sitting with older mystical writings that echo it in strange and specific ways. And every single time, I land in the same place. This wasn't poetry for poetry's sake. This was instruction, folded quietly into language simple enough that almost nobody noticed what it was really saying. Stay with me, because by the end of this, one verse is going to look completely different. And I'm going to walk you through the actual steps how to activate it. The real, practical steps Jesus walked himself, not just something to believe in, but something to actually do. Let's start with the line itself, because it deserves to be read slowly, not skimmed. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. Most people read that and think it's about honesty. Clear intentions, clear soul. That's the surface reading, and it's not wrong. It's just incomplete. It's the version meant for the crowd, the ones who needed a moral lesson and nothing more. But I don't think that's where the sentence stops. I remember the first time I actually sat with those words instead of letting them pass by. Something in me went still, because single eye isn't ordinary language. It's specific, almost anatomical, deliberate in a way regular speech isn't. Jesus taught constantly in layers. He said one thing to the crowd and something far deeper to the ones who were actually listening. His own students asked him privately why he spoke in parables, and he told them plainly, some truths are only for the ones who go looking for them. I think this verse is exactly that. A surface lesson for the crowd, and underneath it, a doorway for anyone willing to dig. I think you're one of the ones willing to dig. Otherwise you wouldn't still be here, this many minutes in, listening this closely to a single sentence from an old book. So let's decode it, because the wording matters more than most people realize. You have two eyes. Everyone does. So why would Jesus specifically say single eye? Not clear, not honest, single. In ancient symbolic teaching, that word points to something unified, one inward organ of perception, as opposed to the two outward ones you use to navigate the physical world. Long before Christianity existed, mystics across different traditions described an inner eye, a third point of perception, associated with insight rather than ordinary sight. Jesus was speaking to a Jewish audience already steeped in centuries of mystical thought, in a region where symbolic teaching was common practice among rabbis and prophets alike. Dropping a phrase like single eye into an everyday sermon wasn't careless. It was intentional. I believe he was handing his listeners a piece of initiation language, disguised as a simple moral saying, so it could travel safely through generations. Here's my honest opinion, and I hold it firmly. Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. Most people would take the surface meaning and walk away satisfied, while a smaller number would sit with the sentence the way you're sitting with it right now, and eventually find something bigger underneath. That's not accidental. That's layered teaching on purpose, from someone who chose every word with care. And I think there's something almost tender about that approach. He wasn't hiding the truth to keep it from you. He was protecting it, folding it gently into ordinary language, trusting that the right person would eventually come along and unfold it again. Maybe that person is you, right now watching this. So what is this inner eye, physically speaking? Let's ground this in something real. Deep in the center of your brain, roughly between your two physical eyes, sits a small structure called the pineal gland. It's tiny but remarkably active. It responds to light and darkness, and it plays a role in regulating your internal rhythms, your sense of waking, resting, and the natural cycles your body moves through every day. For centuries, thinkers well outside religious tradition were fascinated by it too. René Descartes, the 17th century philosopher often credited as the father of modern Western philosophy, went so far as to call the pineal gland the seat of the soul. Not a mystic, a rationalist, working from logic and observation, still landed on the exact same tiny structure that ancient spiritual teachers had quietly pointed toward for generations. That still gives me chills, honestly. A philosopher, centuries after Jesus, working from an entirely different direction, arriving at the same physical address. Scripture and science, meeting in the same small space at the center of the human head. I don't think that's coincidence. I think it's confirmation. The ancients didn't have imaging technology or anatomy textbooks. What they had was generations of deep, disciplined inward attention, passed down carefully as teaching. And somehow, tradition after tradition kept circling back to the same location that biology would later confirm is genuinely light responsive. Think about that for a moment. A structure shaped almost like a tiny eye, buried in the exact center of your brain, reacting to light, sitting in the precise place ancient teachers called the seat of inner vision. I don't need this to be scientific proof of anything. I just need you to notice, the way I noticed, that the overlap is too specific to wave away as coincidence. Now here's where it gets a little uncomfortable, so let me be honest and careful with you at the same time. In 1945, near a town called Nag Hammadi in Egypt, a farmer stumbled onto a sealed jar buried in the sand. Inside were ancient texts, early Christian writings, some claiming to preserve direct sayings of Jesus that never made it into the Bible most of us grew up reading. One of them, the Gospel of Thomas, contains a line that stopped me completely the first time I read it. It describes an inward truth that will save you if you bring it forth, and quietly work against you if it stays buried. No emphasis on external ritual as the only path. No checklist of outward performance. Just an inward reality, sitting there, waiting to be recognized. This lines up closely with something Jesus says in the Gospel you already know, the Gospel of Luke, where he tells the crowd that the kingdom of God is within them, not somewhere distant, not something to wait on, already present, right now, inside the person listening. Why did teachings like this quietly fall out of the spotlight over the centuries? I don't think it's some dramatic conspiracy, and I want to be careful here, because I'm not interested in fear or blame. I think it's simpler and sadder than that. Institutions grow, structure takes over, and the harder, quieter teaching, go inward, look for the light already living in you, slowly got crowded out by the easier one. Show up, follow the rules, wait for a reward later. But the inward teaching never actually disappeared. It stayed exactly where it always was, in his own recorded words. We just stopped listening closely enough to hear it. And honestly, I find that idea more haunting than any conspiracy theory could ever be. Nobody stole this from you. It was simply set aside long enough for people to forget it was ever central to begin with. So let's define this term properly because it gets thrown around loosely online, and it deserves better than that. Christ consciousness isn't a claim that you become divine in some literal, ego-driven sense. That's not what I'm saying, and it's not what serious mystics throughout history meant by it either. It's a state of being, the state Jesus modeled through his entire life. Full awareness, deep compassion, a lived sense of oneness with the divine, not as a distant ruler watching from far away, but as something quiet and alive inside you, waiting patiently to be noticed. Go back to that line again, the kingdom of God is within you. I think that single sentence rewrites everything, if you actually let it land the way it's meant to. Jesus wasn't only describing a future reward waiting after death. He was describing a present reality, available the moment you stop searching outward for permission to feel it. Here's my personal conviction, and you're welcome to sit with it and decide for yourself. I believe Christ consciousness is what happens when that single eye, that inward center of light, actually begins to open. Not as a metaphor, as something felt. Less noise in the mind, more clarity in the chest. A quiet certainty that you were never separate from the divine to begin with, only unaware of how closely woven into it you already are. That reframing changed the way I read the entire gospel. It stopped feeling like a rulebook and started feeling like an instruction manual for waking something up that had been sleeping inside me the whole time. And once I saw it that way, I couldn't go back to reading it any other way again. So if this was a real lived teaching and not just a beautiful turn of phrase, how was it actually practiced? Jesus modeled it constantly, and it's easy to miss because we tend to rush past these details. Before his public ministry even began, he withdrew into the wilderness for 40 days, alone, in stillness and fasting. Later in his life, he regularly climbed mountains by himself to pray, away from the crowds, away from noise and demand. These weren't random habits scattered through the story. They were discipline. deliberate withdrawal from stimulation, in order to sharpen something inward. Centuries later, a group known as the Desert Fathers, early Christian mystics who left cities behind entirely to live in solitude across the Egyptian desert, built whole spiritual practices around this exact principle. Long silence, deep, unhurried prayer, rhythms of light and darkness, waking and rest, mirroring the natural world instead of fighting it. They weren't chasing comfort. They were chasing the same clarity Jesus modeled on those mountains generations earlier. I've come to believe stillness itself is the foundation underneath everything else. Not a purchased program, not a special technique reserved for the spiritually elite. Just consistent, quiet withdrawal from noise, the same way Jesus withdrew. That foundation is what makes the practical steps I'm about to walk you through actually mean something, instead of becoming another empty routine you try once and forget. So let's get specific. Here's how I approach this myself, drawn directly from what Jesus modeled and what the desert mystics practiced after him. 5 steps. Nothing exotic. Nothing you need to buy. Step 1, withdraw. Jesus went to the mountain alone. You don't need a mountain. You need a room, a corner, a few quiet minutes where nobody can reach you. Turn the phone face down, or better, leave it in another room entirely. This single act, on its own, is already half the practice, because most of us never actually give our minds a moment of true quiet. Step 2, darken your evening light. The pineal gland responds to darkness the way it responds to light, and modern life keeps us bathed in artificial glow long after the sun goes down. The mystics lived by natural rhythm, with nothing stretching their nights unnaturally. Simply dimming your lights an hour before you rest, letting your eyes adjust to shadow instead of screens, echoes that same rhythm Jesus and the Desert Fathers lived by without even trying. Step 3. Sit in silence, eyes closed, attention resting gently on the space between your eyebrows. This is the single eye itself brought into practice. Not straining, not forcing focus like you're trying to solve a puzzle. Just resting your attention there softly, the way you'd rest your gaze on a distant horizon. A few minutes is enough to begin, and there's no need to rush toward anything. Step 4. Breathe slowly and repeat a single phrase inwardly. The Desert Fathers used short, repeated prayers to quiet the mind's constant noise. You might use something simple like "The kingdom is within me," spoken silently, matched gently to the rhythm of your breath. Let it anchor you when your thoughts wander, because they will wander, and that's completely normal. That's not failure. That's just what minds do. Step 5. Sit in the silence that follows without rushing to end it. This is the part almost everyone skips. After the prayer, after the breathing settles, there's a gap of quiet that opens up. Jesus didn't rush off the mountain the moment he finished praying. He lingered there. He stayed present in that stillness longer than felt necessary. And I think that lingering is where the real shift tends to happen, not in the doing, but in what comes right after the doing. None of this is a formula with guaranteed results, and I won't pretend otherwise, because anyone promising instant transformation is usually selling you something. But done consistently, over weeks rather than a single sitting, this rhythm is exactly what quietly shaped the inward life Jesus kept returning to again and again, mountain after mountain, silence after silence. So, what if that sentence really was a map all along? I believe it was. I believe Jesus spoke something far bigger than the crowd realized that day, wrapped gently enough that only the ones ready to listen would ever fully hear it. A single eye, an inward kingdom, a light already living inside you, waiting quietly for stillness instead of more noise. Here's my invitation to you. Try the 5 steps this week, even just once, even just for a few minutes. Go back and read the Gospels again, slowly, with this lens in hand. Don't take my word for any of it. Sit with the words yourself, in your own silence, and notice what quietly rises when you do. If something in this opened up for you, tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I mean that. And if you want more of these hidden teachings uncovered, carefully and honestly subscribe, because this is only the beginning of the road we're walking together. The light was never far away. It was always exactly where he said it was, within you.